Good evening. Welcome to this final and keynote session for today's symposium, Seeing ANEW, the Detroit Observatory Past, Present, and Future. I'm Gary Krenz. I'm thrilled to be joined this evening by Brian Nord, and I look forward to our discussion, ranging over topics including science, the science-human relationship, and the ways human beings organize themselves to learn and investigate the world. Before introducing Brian, I want to say that as the archives of the University of Michigan, the Bentley Library, of which the Detroit Observatory is a part, acknowledges that the historical origins and present locations of the university were made possible by cession of lands by Anishinaabe and Wyandot peoples under coercive treaties common in the colonization and expansion of the United States. We note in particular the grant of land made by the Anishinaabe under the Treaty of the Foot of the Rapids for the College at Detroit, so that their children could be educated. These lands continue to be the homeland of Indigenous people, and we seek to reaffirm and respect their contemporary and ancestral ties to the land and to recognize their contributions to the university. Brian Nord is a scientist at Fermi National Accelerator Lab, a case associate in astronomy and astrophysics at the University of Chicago, and a senior member of the Kavli Institute for Cosmological Physics. Brian received his BA in physics from the Johns Hopkins University and his PhD in astrophysics from the University of Michigan. He currently works on teaching machines to search for clues for the universe's origin and destiny. He works on teaching machines, in particular, he uses artificial intelligence to study the cosmos, including dark energy, dark matter, and the early universe. He actively works on statistical modeling of strong gravitational lenses, the cosmic microwave background, and galaxy clusters. He is also a leader in the movement to address inequities and depression in academic and research environments. He co-created the academic #StrikeForBlackLives in June 2020 and works to drive anti-racist efforts and develop justice-oriented communities. He co-founded the Deep Skies community, which is dedicated to shared leadership and prioritizing the humanity of research colleagues over productivity, one of the first organizations of its kind. Welcome, Brian.
Hi, Gary. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And thanks to the whole University of Michigan community for welcoming me back, as it were.
Well, it's good to have you back, and hopefully sometime you'll come back and see the observatory with its new addition.
Yes.
So a theme in your discussions of science is kind of the embeddedness of science in society, and conversely, the embeddedness of society in science. And before we get a bit more specific, I wonder if you'd just like to comment on that idea.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a funny thing, right? Because I think that often we want to, many of us, some scientists and some members who are not scientists, members of the public, there's a tendency to let us think of science as separate from society. And part of that, I think, happens because we really have, as a culture, have constructed an ivory tower where there's a hierarchy and people who are somehow deemed to have done a particular kind of work sit somewhere in that hierarchy. And actually, I don't think scientists, I don't think we do enough actually to tear down that tower. But getting past that, I think of science as a fundamentally or inherently human endeavor, because humans do the science, and then all of us are affected by how that science is done. So whatever way you look at it, I think it's a human thing. And so I don't think science and society can truly be separate because we exist in and generate both of those things. We invented and evolved the scientific method to satisfy our curiosity about the world, about ourselves, and how we're connected to that world. And I think it's critical really for us to remember that we as scientists, there are choices that we make when we study the things we do and how that affects all of us. We choose how to use our knowledge of the nucleus, either to make energy or for mutually assured destruction. We choose how to use our knowledge of mathematics and computers, maybe algorithms that help us find galaxies or algorithms that maybe surveil us. So yeah, I think there's a tendency, particularly among physicists, if not all scientists, to consider ourselves, as I mentioned earlier, divorced from these choices, as if we maybe don't have a responsibility for the discoveries that we make that can be used for any purpose. So yeah, a major question that, especially given the work that I've been doing, that's maybe more the science work that can be maybe more applied in some ways. I've really been scratching my head about how to think about what is our responsibility as scientists in this when we find or create new things that can be used for any purpose. Like, what are we supposed to do before, during, and after we make something?
So one of the things maybe that you do after is communicate to the public, right? And which is a real challenge, right? And here we are. We've just been going through this pandemic in which, follow the science was sort of a mantra, right? And maybe used by different people to hit other people over the head. But I mean, what's the role of the scientist maybe in communicating to the public so that the public can be better engaged in the decisions about what to do with the products of science?
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, I think about, if I think about algorithms and I think about data, this is a moment that's very similar to ones that we experienced in the 70s during the Cold War, in the 40s when we were figuring out the atom, where we're creating technologies that are some of the most powerful that the world has ever seen. And I think at minimum, our role is to serve the rest of people who don't have the privilege to think about these things or to create them. Our role is to serve them by helping them understand enough so that we all together can be making the decisions, so that everyone around us and all of us can go to our congresspersons and say, hey, we need to do something. We need AI regulation or whatever it is. So I think at minimum, that's what we need to be doing. I personally, because of the large role that I play, or like where I spend my mental energy in these algorithms, like I feel like I need to be doing a lot. I'm trying, but I feel like I even need to be doing a lot more to like even advocate for things like regulation and that in this context.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we're here, because we're celebrating this reopening of the Detroit Observatory. And when it first opened in 1854, it was the first dedicated research facility at U of M, one of the very first in the country. In the earlier sessions today, we heard some things about how it evolved and maybe devolved and then re-evolved over time and so forth. And partly because of a failure of the university to invest in new technology at important inflection points in the development of the discipline of astronomy. And so technology and facilities go through these kinds of changes. And what does that mean for the people using that technology, the people who inhabit those facilities?
Yeah, I guess the best way I know how to think about this is thinking about how we tend to organize ourselves around science. And let me think here for a second. So yeah, there are lots of different forces that push us in different directions. Sometimes there's a problem that we want to solve as a community or as a society. So it would be, it'd be great. Well, there was great work that was done to begin to address the pandemic, right? Like something happened as a society, we took it on, and people did some amazing work. And then, thinking about climate change, things like that. And you could maybe also in smaller, relatively smaller communities, we approach problems like what is dark matter, what is dark energy, and things like that. But the societal pressures, the geopolitical pressures that push us in particular directions are huge. So, we didn't get into the space race because like we we wanted to explore the stars. Like, that's a beautiful thought, but it was really because we were competing with the Soviet Union for nationalistic and economic and technological dominance. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, like the same kind of thing is happening right now with artificial intelligence and quantum computing, but where more so like our geopolitical counterpart is China. So when we think about the interplay between the people doing the scientific work and the bigger pressures outside, and how we go through these cycles, it relates to those geopolitical and those resource driven issues, I think. And I guess, and so I would say that, like, that's one angle on it. There's another angle on it that we can get into now or later if you want, that has to do with race, gender, and economics.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I think that's great.
So, as in societies that like America's culture and society is so, well, relatively mixed, even though it still is highly segregated. There are these forces, these economic forces, these geopolitical forces, but there's also, it's funny, as in cosmology, there's this idea of how the universe, how structure in the universe formed. So at these early stages in the universe, there are these little seeds of matter, and sort of you let these little seeds of matter are there. I won't get into why they're there, but they're there and they're randomly distributed. And then you turn gravity on and things clump. And so there's a thing that happens from the beginning that like the game, in a way, the game is set from the beginning. In a similar way, in American society and many societies across the world, white supremacy is part of that thing that happened early on that we're still building on and is still affecting every part of society, including science. And you can see how this affects science because you can just look at who's around. So think about, I encourage everyone to think, how many Black physicists and astronomers do you know about? Not do you know personally, but just do you know about, right? And it's probably a lot fewer than white ones, for example. You can also look at the bare numbers. So there have been only a few more than 100 Black women physicists in all of US history. These are PhD holders. And some physics departments alone have more total professors than that, right? Between 2001 and 2006, there were a total of 6 Native Americans who earned PhDs in physics. And then there's one that's kind of personal to me, which is thinking about Fermilab. Dr. Herman White was the first Black scientist to get tenure at Fermilab. He retired in 2020. That was the same year that I was promoted to tenured scientist, and I'm the second Black person to earn that promotion at Fermilab. So one or fewer per generation is how we're growing in this field at the moment.
So that's, clearly that, I mean, on the one hand, that's obviously a very important and serious social justice issue. I mean, that we have had with us in this country, as you say, I mean, basically from the beginning, if not before the beginning, depending on what you count as the beginning, right? But what about, I mean, how does that bear actually on how does that bear actually on the practice of science? I mean, is science done less well or differently or whatever because we don't have as diverse a community of scientists as we could?
Well, I think one way to think about that is, and I guess I want to introduce a little caveat first, and there's nothing really, I don't think there's anything wrong with the way you pose the question, but I want to be clear about my stance just about something, because
Sure.
I think that there's a thought in the zeitgeist about how diversity correlates with productivity. And there is an argument in a lot of our communities that we should be more diverse so that we can do better work. And that's,
Yes, yeah.
thing, but I wanted to throw that out there, right? That like,
No, I appreciate that.
There's a difference for like why we should do these things.
But
that being said, like, think about the talent and the people, just the people that we're losing who aren't here next to us to lend their creativity to this endeavor. When we exclude people, everyone who has potential to contribute, and instead we include people who are not necessarily there because of their hard work, but because of their privilege. This poses a tension for us in how we, how do we build these communities, and how do we all benefit from them? How do we all get access to the knowledge that is really a human right?
Mhm, mhm. I want to come back to that because it's an important point, and it's an important point even for, I mean, here we are at the Detroit Observatory, which is obviously not going to be a research facility, but is going to have an educational function. And so ways we might think about that to do with the work that we're trying to do here. But first, I wanted to just kind of so you're working with artificial intelligence and
Mm,
machine learning and so forth, and these are pretty new ideas, right? They're pretty, relatively speaking, right?
relatively, yeah,
This
yeah.
is and I mean, I'm even thinking, it just comes to mind now when. So when the observatory was built, there was a room set aside for computers, which of course meant human beings,
Right.
who were doing hand calculations as they were being fed things from the astronomer in the dome. Some of them perhaps women. I don't think we know for sure at U of M, but this was not uncommon at that time. So we go from computers that were humans to, at some point, with Babbage and then beyond, with computers that were machines, and now we're talking about something altogether different. And I
Mm,
guess there are two things that I want to sort of probe on. One is, you know, sort of introducing a new idea or a not fully accepted idea. I mean, what's involved with that as as an individual scientist, sort of facing a community that is maybe not ready for this.
I, something that I find remarkable is that, and this, I'm including myself in this, that physicists are, uh, interestingly, I think there's an interesting balance between open-mindedness and skepticism in science, and they're both critical, right? Because we have to be, we need to be open to imagining how the universe is doing what it's doing, because we don't get to tell it what to do. So we have to when we figure that out, we have to be ready for some really bananas things that could happen that aren't close to our intuition. Um, but we all and in order to get things right, there's really only one path through all of this knowledge, though. Like, there aren't multiple right things in a lot of cases. Um, so we have to carefully investigate, interrogate, probe these ideas that come up, these hypotheses. Um, but even though I think most of us have a really great balance here, I often end up being surprised about sometimes how some of our colleagues, and I probably do this sometimes too, how when a new idea comes along, like, there's a very initial reaction of, no, that can't be it. And I think that happened a little bit with artificial intelligence in this. So we're in this third age of artificial intelligence. Actually, there was a first one, back in like the 30s and 40s, sort of, and then there was another one in, yeah, there have been three. I think the other one was in the 80s and 90s, I want to say. That was the second one, anyway. But this more recent one, people were rightly skeptical because there were a couple of AI winters in between, right? Like, there's all this hype and overpromise about what they could deliver. And it seems to be this time that it's delivering a lot more than it had in the past. It's closer to what the earlier promises are, but we're still actually, like, we're really not there yet. We're not close to some kind of artificial generalized intelligence. But in this recent beginning of the third age, it was funny because, I was a postdoc when it got started, and one of my advisors actually said to me when I was like, I want to apply this to strong lenses. My advisor said, "This sounds more like computer science than science," and maybe so, or maybe computer science now is another more integrated piece of the science that we do in an everyday way. So, yeah, it's been a little bit of an interesting adventure to see this evolve, because this is one of the first times that I've been able to witness a real sea change during my career, a real sea change in how we do research. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, so it's interesting that I mean, the idea of a sea change like that. I mean, partly, of course, there's this kind of delicate balance between the individual scientist and the community of scientists. And in a way, the community, I mean, we sort of have to have a community. This is not just true of science, this is true in other disciplines as well. There has to be a community that's, in a way, an arbiter, I suppose, not an arbiter of truth, but an arbiter of proper inquiry. I mean,
Mm,
what's the proper form of inquiry? But of course, on the other hand, you do get paradigm shifts of different sorts, and that takes somebody really kind of recognizing something or pushing something. Or maybe sometimes, at least, it takes somebody pushing something that maybe the community doesn't quite recognize.
that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think I think about it a little bit as stewardship. Um, that I Yeah, in how I think about taking my little pickaxe to the ivory tower. I try to think of it as taking care of something, and
Hmm.
not, rather than gatekeeping, which is what we often do in that scenario. And
Hmm.
yeah, that's a good question, right? Like, how can we be good stewards in ways that we leave doors open for the people coming in behind us, and but not just doors open, but like tearing down walls so that everyone can be a part of this process. And
Hmm.
yeah, I think one of the ways that I think about that is in some of the public engagement service that I do through U Chicago. We work with some public high school students, and my concept for that program is I want them to experience the discomfort of confusion and not knowing, to the point where they become comfortable with not knowing, because that's the process of research, right? Being sort of continuously confused and looking around the room and say, oh my gosh, on one hand, like sort of urgently and fervently and impatiently like wanting to figure something out, but at the same time having a calm and having a process to get through that confusion. I think that's one of the most special things that we get to learn as stewards of this process of science. And I think the earlier that we can help people figure out how to do that, that I think that's much better than learning to look up things in the back of a book, or being ready for an answer in the back of a book.
Right. Well, in some way, I think I saw you say somewhere that I mean, that science. I mean, science in some sense is the process of failure, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and I think, but really, I mean, well, the philosopher Charles Peirce said, in the end, the only thing that reality can say to us is no. It can't tell us. It can't tell us what it is. It can only say, no, you're not right. You didn't get it right.
Exactly.
And so, partly, I mean, that program is fantastic because I think sometimes we see, at an institution like Michigan, too many students who are terrified of failure. Right? I mean, failure is not a step to progress. Failure is like an endpoint, and we got to find ways to sort of mitigate that kind of sensibility.
Well, and I'm still learning to embrace failure. Like literally, like today, I'm still figuring, like it's been, there's a slope to my progress, but the slope has changed over time, right? Like it was during grad school and during some of my postdoc time when I started thinking of the scientific method as the process of failing as fast as possible. And then that was just sort of ended up being a little mantra for me to like take more joy in being able to experiment and not worry about getting it wrong, because that's one maybe of infinite, but that's one more thing to cross off. That's not how the universe works, and that's great. And now it's funny, actually, in a lot of meetings with students, like a student will come in and say, and they'll be a little bit disappointed, like, yeah, I found a bug, sorry. And I'd be like, yes, You found a bug, because it's like there's probably going to be a bug in the code somewhere, and the sooner you find it, the better we're off. So yeah, I thinking about failure and the scientific method together this way has been great for me, just as a way to fight my own imposter syndrome and kind of work through coming back to that comfort with not knowing.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate your candor on that too. So tell us more about your work with AI and cosmology.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. So the world, the universe is, we for a long time we've known it's really big, but now we're really starting to get a ton of this data. Like, every decade or so, I think some scientific community probably says we have more data than we've ever had before. I think it's worth arguing or contending that we really do have a lot more now than we know how to handle. And what I think what I mean by that is, the data is so complex that there's a lot more hidden in it than it's really going to be easy or feasible for us to get with just human derived or empirically derived models alone. So looking for patterns in the large scale structure of galaxies, um, those patterns in that cosmic web are what's going to tell us about this tug of war between, say, dark energy and dark matter holding things together and dark energy pulling things apart. And there's really going to be these little faint hints and patterns that we need to discern. And so I, in grad school, working with Gus Everard and Tim McKay, I spent a lot of time working on galaxy clusters. And then when I moved to Fermilab, I started working on strong lensing. And one of the early works we did there was to look at dark energy survey data. Survey that just finished about I want to say a year or 2 years ago, and we got some of the early data, and it was a small fraction of what we were eventually going to get, but we still spent dozens of hours amongst like a dozen or 20 of us just sifting through visually through these large images to find these really weird looking galaxies. And it was fun, but then I was like, I don't want to do this again. not at this scale. And so this is 2015, 2016, and this is really when deep learning and neural networks started to kick off. So that's when I started playing with these tools. Yeah, so now one way to put, I think, what I do is I sort of do facial recognition but for galaxies, right? But so we could stop there. We could say, let's just use these deep learning tools in computer vision and let's just go find stuff and then do more science with that. But when you let yourself kind of get ensconced in these ideas and you sit around and you're standing at whiteboards, you're walking around, you start to wonder, where else can these tools be used? And a couple of years ago, it came to me that maybe we can use not just deep learning or not just neural networks, but the vast array of tools that are considered part of artificial intelligence. We might be able to use them to really accelerate every piece of the scientific method. So I'm talking about simulating the universe. I'm talking about analyzing data, but also what about controlling telescopes? So I think not in the too far future, we're going to have self-driving telescopes that know how to, looking at the data, figure out where to point next. And they only need us to sort of, again, stand by and steward them along. And we can talk more about this, but this whole automating the scientific method, it sounds a little buzzwordy, and that certainly there's peril, but I think there's enough promise that it's worth pursuing.
So what are the perils? I mean, in a way, so here's in a way almost a classic story. I mean, you're involved in a mind-numbing job that is just a lot of tedium, and lo and behold, there's technology that can help. But if that gets developed too much, then some people are out of work, right? I mean, so to speak. So, I mean, just say some things about that.
So, you know, the industrial age, if none other, showed us that we're really good at developing technology and in implementing it faster than we're good at doing that faster than we are at taking care of each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's already happening with AI, and it's going to continue unless we get some more regulation in there. And by the way, unless scientists start talking about regulation, please. But so we don't who's going to do their taxes by hand these days? I mean, I guess I do, but I do it in a spreadsheet, so I'm still using technology. But we move on, right? And
Right.
so I think it's about keeping our sense of humanity in pace with our sense of technology. And when it comes to automating the scientific method, it's or any of these things, it's not about. It doesn't need to be about replacing humans. I think we should be thinking it more about how do we reevaluate our relationship with the technology, because we have the capacity to take the time to help each other have new modes of living and earning a living, or whatever our paradigm is for survival. We can do that. We don't have to let the technology outstrip our humanity. And so I see a future where we have self-driving experimental facilities, and we have some software frameworks that do some of this automation for science. But then humans are still very much there, because we can use it as a tool rather than having it replace everything that we do. Um, a little bit more than that, what's the point of automating the scientific method and automating discovery if we can't understand what's happening with it? If we don't get to take in that knowledge and do something with it. So I don't see a way of taking the human out of the loop. It's just rearranging our situation in it.
Yeah. So yeah. So how? I mean, so how do you keep the human in the loop? I mean, let me see if I can really formulate what I'm trying to here. Um, if to some extent, human learning, is a matter of there's a hands-on aspect to it. There's a matter of sitting with the problem or with the object or whatever it might be. I mean, so this is certainly true in the humanities, I think, right? I mean, there's got to be a lot of percolating going on. Is there a risk of undercutting that percolation, so to speak?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, there's certainly a risk. And while we develop some of these seemingly fantastical tools, we're going to need to develop infrastructure and utilities that help keep us close to what the tools are doing. So, in the simplest case, go back to the self-driving telescope. Let's say the Detroit Observatory had an algorithm that, if somebody wanted to do an equatorial survey, it just ran across the sky, and that was like an experiment that students could do or something. You'd still want to have images being spit out occasionally, so that a human can be like, oh wait, is it correcting the bias properly?
Mm-hmm.
Or you need to have sensors around, so that so it wouldn't tilt too far, into
Mm-hmm.
the plane. So while we're building the sort of fun tools, we got to do the hard work of making sure we know how the human computer interaction is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. 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 So we've been talking a little bit about, I mean, in a way, we've been talking about, well, I don't know, maybe we've ranged over a few things. This idea of the place of society and science, and we did touch a little bit on the place of science in society, or of the scientist in society, at least in helping to think about how to utilize or control the output of science. Um, but maybe we could talk about that a little more. I mean, how to and maybe what I'm saying here is, well, I mean, how do we construct an educational experience or an educational system
Mm.
that is going to help not the people who are going to go to grad school and become scientists, but the people who, as citizens, are going to need to have scientific literacy at some level, which clearly seems to be largely lacking in many ways in our society at this time.
Yeah, I think there's a funny thing that happens in professional science, or the path toward professional science in academia. There's a lot that is just tailored to how to make a beeline to professor. And that's kind of funny, right? Because like the way that our funding works in the US, at least, it doesn't make room for for continuing to grow the professorship.
Right.
So what I'm happy about is that a lot of programs are doing things a little bit differently to show people that, it's not even about offshooting. It's not saying, oh, I didn't make it in academia, so let me do other things. It's not about that, right? It's figuring out how you want to spend your time. And I think a lot of programs are helping people do that in ways that don't make us feel the shame that previous generations may have felt when they had to leave academia. So I think that, one thing that we need to be doing is changing the culture of how we talk about science, professional science, and academia, because, yeah, I think, well, as people traverse this path through STEM education, there's this actually relates to what you were saying earlier, one of your earlier questions. There are new forcing mechanisms that actually originate with data science and artificial intelligence that are drawing people out from academia because, frankly,
Mm-hmm.
the money is better over there.
Right.
Right. And so I think that forcing mechanism is one of the things that has helped our culture change a little bit, so that people are, instead of having off ramps, it's more about just what is the tree of options in front of us. But so getting a little bit closer to your original question, I think that the earlier we can offer real opportunities for sort of original inquiry, and offering people the opportunity to experience what science is, even if it's, the discomfort, as I mentioned, but also that sense of discovery, offering that early on in people's lives and educational careers. I think that's one of the key ways that people can have a more ingrained sense of what it means to wrestle with nuance, to wrestle with shades of gray, to wrestle with error bars that are overlapping, because that's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of where we live, especially when there's this inundation of information. Figuring out which sources make sense, which don't, which ones sort of overlap but don't. I think it's a habit of critical thinking and appreciating these nuances that I think we want to help people have access to at earlier stages in life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a sense, isn't there, in which, I mean, in a way, sort of all learning is research. I mean, even the learning that an infant does, right? Even in some sense, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what I do on a daily basis is just hopefully accelerated guess and check. I don't know how else to do. I don't. That's how I fail. I guess wrong, and then I guess, and I check, and I'm wrong. Okay, I go to the next guess. And yeah, and I think sometimes we get lucky and we get to have an experience or a couple in our lives where that guess and check leads to something completely new that no one has ever known before. But there's also just the joy of having made sense of things that made your brain hurt for a while.
Yes, right.
Yeah, pulling together two seemingly incongruous, disparate parts of the universe into something new that makes sense, even for ourselves. That, to me, those are the spaces where I think research and learning, yeah, really overlap.
Right, right. We talked a little bit earlier about some of the sort of more, I suppose, utilitarian motivations for research and so forth. But surely just basic curiosity is something, right? I mean, for whatever reason, and whatever the evolutionary explanation is, I don't know. But we are curious about the world around us. We want to delve into it. We want to, have our current experience of it result in another experience that is somehow richer and leads us forward.
Yeah, this for me, that this connects a little bit to some of my desire to explore the universe. That when we were talking pre-show,
Mm-hmm.
I was saying how like my early physics class in high school, I somehow encountered wormholes. I was like, yes, please let me go find aliens. And that like I was just, I mean, part of it was that I wanted to. Part of it, I think, really was dealing with my social anxiety as a teenager. I wanted to get to a space where I could, I could experience something novel and beautiful alone, probably. But mixing my curiosity with these other foibles or just realities that make me human, that also make me human, I think are what drive us in these directions to figure things out, to find. I guess in that case, that is sort of the merging of trying to find the universe and trying to find myself, at least in that case.
Right, right. Well, we have some questions coming in from the audience, so let me turn to this now. And here is one. You are inspiring, which I agree. Is there a way for you to reach the anti-ivory tower public? Or do we hope you reach the ivory tower people and then the understanding finds its way to the anti-academic folks?
Yeah, thank you for this question. This is something that I struggle with probably on a daily basis. I think that it's a little buzzwordy, and I forget where it comes from. But there's a phrase that I heard a couple of months ago that said, "We move at the speed of trust," and yeah. So how do we forge a new sense of trust between people? And it's tough because a lot of us are having trouble listening to each other. I mean, I know that I'm having trouble listening to people that I think have wildly different viewpoints than mine. And I do think that there's in the second part of your question, I think there is a bit of an answer. I think that we need to build tighter connections, like a longer stream with tighter connections between people, where one of us connects to the other and they connect to the other person, they connect to the other person. And I think that's one of the ways that we can build the trust that we need to over time. It does mean that we need to be communicating more in intimate ways, and when I say intimate, I mean where we're being vulnerable about what we know and what we don't know, what we believe, what we're ready to believe or not. And I think that's some of the hard, just daily work that we have to do.
Yeah, which it is hard work, right? I mean, it's hard to make yourself vulnerable. It's also just hard to. I mean, people are so overwhelmed in so many ways with daily life. Maybe there's a role for AI here to free up the time to have these kinds of discussions. Right?
Hey, it's funny. Didn't somebody tell us, back in the 80s and 90s that we were only going to have like a 4-day work week because computers are going to do all the work for us? But
that's right.
Here we are. This weekend, I'm probably going to work on a paper because I didn't have time during the week. So what's happening?
Yeah. That's right.
Hopefully, we can nudge some things in that direction of machines actually doing stuff, but not, but us having more leisure time and human time. Yeah.
Right. Another question: how do we make science more attractive to people, especially to those not originally so inclined, as computers appear to take on more of the practical loads of actually doing science?
Interesting. So I might, hopefully it's okay with the person who asked the question. I might split these up a little bit. this is a little related to the previous question, because I think, well, well, actually, maybe a slight preface is, we've been talking about science tonight, but also pre-show, Gary and I, we were talking about philosophy a little bit. And when I think about automating the scientific method, or even before we get to this thing that I want to do for the next 10 years, just thinking about artificial intelligence and even the models and algorithms that we've been using before that, there's a question about epistemology, about the human relationship with knowledge. And that's not something that, like, a physicist is not, who has never been trained in philosophy or epistemology, is not out of the box going to go write down a new formula and figure out our relationship with knowledge. And I say that because there's this is the ivory tower thing, right? There's a tendency to hierarchicalize how we see knowledge, and often actually physics gets put at the top, because it's sort of ironically, because it's considered to be the fundamental thing that's underlying everything else. Mm-hmm. But there's no field that can do other fields' jobs automatically. And so and I say that because also science is important, and there's something unique about it, but it doesn't make it more important than sociology or the humanities or anything like that. We actually just need all of us working together, especially in this new era of automation. When it comes to thinking about the future of ethics with respect to these tools, mm-hmm. I'm not a sociologist. I need to partner with ethicists and sociologists to figure out how to implement these tools in an ethical way. So I wanted to put that just up front, because I think it is important I think it is important for all of us to appreciate the different roles of these different fields, and science is one of them. It's just that science isn't necessarily more important. And I think making science attractive, given those caveats, I think making science attractive is partially about two things at least. One is making it relevant to daily lives, because not everybody has the privilege to pretend to be Newton and sit under a tree, if that's a privilege. But not everybody has the privilege to to spend time thinking about abstractions of the universe. There are other things, other basic needs that sometimes have to be taken care of first. And then the other thing is, that there was an article a couple of years ago that showed by age 4 or 5, it was between the ages of 3 and 5 or 3 and 6, where young girls decided that they didn't look like scientists, or scientists. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the role for them. Right. So we need to do something about our culture to stop excluding people from this enterprise, because especially in professional STEM, there is a long but recently exposed history of things like harassment and discrimination and exclusion, especially and in some ways, especially for gender minorities, that has kept people out of this enterprise. So I think we need to think about ways to hold ourselves accountable as a community to make this a space where everyone has an opportunity.
So what would you, so that the question in a way was about, the people who are not interested, but what would you say to a college sophomore who is thinking about physics or astronomy or another science? I mean, what advice would you give that student?
Oh, this is a great question. So in my research group, we do a lot of this discussion now too, because it's funny that it's not as if there's a recipe for success in professional STEM or academia, but what I think is pretty clear now to a lot of us is that if you don't do a certain number of this constellation of things, then it's going to be a lot harder to make it, right? So I sort of enjoy thinking about what are these hidden little ingredients in the recipe. I think, and this relates to some of what we were talking about earlier, I think if you're even if you're in high school, but yeah, if you're in mid-career in college, I think one of the best things that can be done is to get into a space where you can do something collaborative in open inquiry. So like do some get into a little hacker collective in your school, and play with some problems that you might think are interesting, or that are sitting out there and maybe unsolved. They don't have to be big problems, but just something to tinker with, and do something where there isn't exactly an answer waiting for you at the end. So that could be on your own in a crew of folks that are your peers, or it could be trying to join a research group. Those are some of the best ways to get a sense of like what that world looks like, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What about for younger kids? I mean, you've done some work too. I mean, with younger kids in terms of introducing them to science and to inquiry, and had some remarkable experiences in that regard, which I think you touched on. But anything more to say about that? I mean, the idea of ensuring that, or trying to do a better job so that people can see themselves in whatever the growing up field might be is critical. I mean, it's part of this mass culture, television. I'm told that the Big Bang show, which I never actually watched, but I'm told that it had a big impact, at least on some people, some kids, in terms of the idea that physics might be something worth thinking about. I don't know.
I've had the fortune to work with many high school students, and that's been some of the best collaborations I've had. So I would repeat that advice for whether you're in college or high school. If there's a way to find a group of people to work with to play with a problem, I don't know how to get better experience than that. School is important. Getting good grades is important, but you have to do that if you want to go in this particular direction. But I don't think it should be done to the exclusion of doing these open inquiry things. But also have fun. Like one of the things that I think was the hardest for me to learn about the line of work I'm in is that it is one of the easiest things to overwork yourself in.
Mm-hmm.
One of the viewpoints, and this is still evolving for me, but one of the viewpoints that I've come to hold is that there's something that happens, I think, with professional science, which is that there's sort of a hero complex that's involved in our field, and you can kind of see this because there's the idea of the lone solver of problems, this one amazing person who did all this work, and that's almost never is that like how something was ever discovered. But this goes this idea propagates all the way to the earlier stages of people's lives, where we make it seem like it's a calling. We make it seem like maybe we're chosen, or maybe it's not just something you do that you get paid for, but it's a vocation. And I think that the balance has tilted from inspiring job and good way to spend my time and learn about the universe to like, this is what I have to do with my life, and so I spend all of my time doing it. So I think finding a balance in our lives about I think it's important to enjoy what we're doing, at least in this kind of like system that we live in, to split our time between work and other parts of our lives, but enjoy what we're doing, but not to the expense of having a well-lived and full life.
Right. And we see some signs that could suggest that the pandemic has helped people wake up to that a little bit, but we'll have to see how robust that response
Great resignation.
Really is. Yeah, the Great Resignation, which now from what I'm reading maybe wasn't so great after all. I don't know, but
I'm kind of just wondering, when is that going to happen in academia, or is it maybe slowly happening due to data science? I don't know.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So one last question I think we have time for. How do lay people know what regulations to press our Congress people for?
Thank you for this question. I do have a bit of a long-winded, but some of it will be pithy answer. So as I mentioned earlier, I do sort of facial recognition for galaxies. And I think one of the key takeaways that I would love people to have here about artificial intelligence is that part of the reason it works in the spaces that it does, which is in so many, is that the tool is a very generalizable tool. So this means that if I try to make fundamental improvements to an algorithm to distinguish different kinds of galaxies better, there's a good chance that somebody could then use that to actually do facial recognition better. The problem with this is that, and this is well documented in federal government studies, facial recognition is biased against people of color. So I'm not that dark skinned. I'm fairly like light skinned black dude, but like I am building tools that can be used against me. And so it wasn't exactly this that woke me up to it, because you don't need that personal connection necessarily to understand what's going on here. But for me, I think that makes it stark that we all in different ways have a stake in this fight, because these tools are agglomerated by large institutions and corporations. We need to have a way to hold them accountable. So one of the ways to know what regulations to press our congresspeople for are, in this case, I can just tell you, I think we should be banning facial recognition until we can use it ethically. And me and 10 other, at least maybe 14 other municipalities across the country agree, because these municipalities, they've already started banning facial recognition in certain ways. So San Francisco, parts of Boston. So I think we need a federal ban on facial recognition. I don't think we should be using it at airports, though we're going to be seeing that pretty soon, but sort of already. And I'll just throw out there, there's a great computer scientist who has been forging an amazing path in this direction. So Joy Buolamwini, she started the Algorithmic Justice League, and she starred in the movie called Coded. I'm not going to remember it in the moment. I'll remember it as soon as we get off camera. But Joy Buolamwini coded something. It's on Netflix, and it's a great documentary about how to think about these tools and maybe even where to get involved.
Okay, that's a great tip. That's a great tip. Well, Brian, any last thoughts before we close up?
Just thank you so much, Gary. This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you, University of Michigan. Thank you to everybody that's out there, and thank you for all the questions. This has been, thank you for exchanging these ideas and letting us jam on this. This has been great. And go have fun. Have a weekend.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. I think it's been a great discussion, and I've enjoyed it tremendously. Okay, this is
and congratulations, of course. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. No, yeah, thank you.
I hope it goes great tonight when you all get to go out there and see the instruments.
Thank you. We're very excited. So this is the conclusion of our symposium. I want to thank all of our panelists over the course of the day, and the moderators, as well as those who have done really great work behind the screen. Lara Zeeland, Andrew Rutledge, Austin Edmister, and the Michigan media team of Carl Cole and Robert Hayes. This is just the beginning. You know, tonight's event is ticketed. If you couldn't get a ticket, don't despair. We are doing these events every Friday in April, and hopefully we will increase the number in May. So continue to check our website. Thanks again, Brian, for the discussion, and best wishes to you for your work ahead on all fronts.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you all, and good evening.